To this presentation. I'm Alan Josias from Southern New Hampshire University. I'm going to deliver this presentation about the addressing age and end of life on a project specifically called A Method of Perspective. So I'm going to talk about different issues, but the first one is to make an introduction to aging and death and mortality. Mortality is the number of deaths due to disease divided by the total population. It's death on a large scale. Death is also the end of life on a person or organism. Death and grief are normal life events, and all culture has developed ways to cope up with death in a respectful manner. This slide shows about the description of first example about artistic representation of death. Starting with the introduction, in this video, each person was proclaiming that I will die. This shows that death is an universal fact of life. A large number of countries were saying the same simple sentence, I will die. The societies developed elaborate religious or ceremony to visualize, to mourn and comfort death. In ancient Egypt and China, people attempted to prolong life by elaborate tombs furnished for the afterlife. This slide, as you can see, it is a European art of Middle Age, and it is made by a known artist. And a motif used in Europe art is the dance marked or dance of death. Skeletal figure interact with the living, and skeletal figures reading, as you can see on this slide, it is reading people of different classes and occupation to their grave as individuals danced along or tried to flee. Then appeared in a painting, stained glass window, wooden carving. Visual representation of dance of death served to remind the literature to be vigorous at all time, because death could strike at a moment. By continuing, death reading a doctor holding a vial of urine. It is portrayed as skeleton, and death is trying to read a doctor off into great unknown. Even at the time, it was common medical practice to examine color and quality for indication of diseases. Here, the dance of death reflects that death was real presence in everyday life. So by continuing, as you can see on this picture, it shows a dying man surrounded by individuals who receive God's mercy after living in a sin, Mary Magdalene. As two demons below the man unsuccessfully try to lead him into temptation, an angel about him consoles him, saying, "You should not despair by any means." So in this picture, as you can see, there was a dispute, the end of all life on earth. Death in the form of skeleton rides a poor horse by the middle ground, leading an army of execution. The foreground, as you can see, individuals representing different situations in life, a skin, okay, and a loving couple and knight who were slaughtered. All fell prey to death. At the time, the residents of Antwerp were involved in a religious war with the Spain. So for this picture, as you can see, there is mortality. They say mortality is essential to the ambassadors. They portray the spirit Jean de Deville, the ambassador to England from the French court of King Francois I. There was a George the Self, a French bishop and diplomat. Between them, as you can see, is a two-tiered church holding an array of worldly goods, including books, musical instruments, and there were hidden within the composition a small element serving as a reminder of death. Human achievement is transient, and that death is inevitable, as everyone can. By Continuing, in the late 19th century, European artists revived the Catholic and Renaissance imagery of the dance macabre. In early 20th century, Mexican artists created images of death that still reappear annually in celebration of Day of Death. For this picture, there were a description of second example about artistic representation of death. Figure shows a satirical image of a upper-class woman as skeleton, demonstrating that even the rich and powerful are vulnerable to death. Decorated skulls like these ones inspired contemporary British artist John Reker to make rhinestone and diamond-encrusted sculpture. For a man of God presence, the paradox of using diamonds, which is luxury items commonly advertised as a symbol of eternity in the representation of death and ephemeral nature of human existence. For this picture, there is a fantastic coffin. In South Ghana, the Ga people developed a local tradition of fantasy coffin made out of wood, carved and vivid, painted into elaborate forms symbolizing the social status. A fisherman may prefer a fish or lobster. A hunter may prefer a lion or a leopard. Documentary on this Friday, there were a Theocard head, which is a memorial portrait of Aka Lura. It shows how the general shapes and expression of the face was idealized, given a smooth roundness, perfect symmetry of the basic features. Portrait of the past rulers would reside a section of the cemetery known as a momos. Some images commemorating the dead are designed to aid grieving process. Also, they take the form of hanging portraits, painting, or graves that are worn, carried by the mourner. Also, there is what to have to remember on this. There are some examples that shows cultural values and belief. Example shows that each society culture has tradition that represent death, like Mexican culture that represents death as a skeleton feature. People present death differently due to their culture and belief. Due to different culture and belief, people perform different ceremonies while representing death and dying. In some culture, more people cry when a person dies, the more the person was. So in most culture, death is portrayed as a reminder to reiterate to be veterans of the old time, since death could strike at. So some culture and belief like Ghanaian culture, the artist would convey specific features such as hairstyle and scarification mark, served to distinguish an individual. That is seldom discussed in an open, forthright manner. Image of death, celebrity, occupy place in postmodern. The purpose of creating work in terms of message or ideas. The purpose of creating work may be communicate ideas spiritually or philosophically. It creates a sense of beauty in modern lives. It governs how people express individual creativity, feelings about real life. It is designed to shape people's mind about the past story and current situation. Part 2 of the presentation: role of social and demographic factors to perception about death in USA. We have to know, first of all, some example meaning of social and demographic factors. Social factors are things that affect lifestyle. Demographic factors are they include age and gender. This factor are related to structure of population or sector of the population. Also, social factors include religious, family, income education, unemployment, food insecurity. So, social and demographic factors play much role in driving change in perception about death in the United States between 90s and today. Social factor. In the 90s, deaths were highly caused by wealth-related issues like diseases such as tuberculosis, typhoid fever, and diphtheria. On the side of demography, in the 90s, the demographic core epidemiology transition where redistribution of death from young to the old. Today, there is a reduction risk of dying at young age from infection disease. More people survive into old age where they tend to die from degenerative disease. This results in growing proportion of aged people in the community. Today, most deaths result from chronic illness such as heart disease or cancer. In it, people like 65% and other accounted for about 70% of death. People are living and dying at old age. Socially, medical technology is another factor in resensing our family with dying. The nature of modern medicine tends to distance family and friends from patient who is dying. This social and demographic factor can be understood as socio-cultural force that influence the way people learn about death and childhood and beyond, and even beyond. Medical technology, demographic change, shifting disease patterns, urbanization, and professionalizations. So about discussion, about discussing about the video or TV shows that talk about death, we have come up with a show called Awareness of Death and Personal Mortality Show. This was delivered by University of California Television by Carter Public Symptom on March 3, 2017. The aim was to discuss about the archaeology of immortality in the ancient world. It was made by the Gui and Rees. It started by giving a kind of quote saying that death is not an event in life. We do not live to experience death. It says without the concept of death, language to name it might not be possible. It says that also death does not concern us because as long as we exist, death is not here, and when it comes, we no longer exist. People present death as a very decorated skeleton, and it does not look to appear in most Christian burial and many faiths. In today's works dominated by three most religious, which believe that God or Allah promised that life after death will be the destiny for those who believe. Some other people do not believe and accept afterlife in accordance with death. Also, there were representation of death, mortality reflect people's attitude in different ways. This is how the TV shows has affect people's understanding about death. Representation of death and mortality tried to change people's feelings about death, and it aimed at removing fear from people about death by using different factors. Of course, it explained how people shows now that death is part of their life here on the world. It shows that religious belief influence people's understanding about death. Christians believe that after life on the world, death comes as their destiny after life. Let's talk about issue related to death and mortality in healthcare. Healthcare providers perform several actions to help patients from approaching death. There is some advanced technology. There is some terminal care that patient dying should get from the healthcare providers. There is a diagnosis of a dying person to conclude a death. It should be done by healthcare providers. There is a high quality treatment to patient. It is examine the association between waiting for outpatient care and mortality using administrative data. As a conclusion, death and grief are normal life events, and all culture has developed ways to cope with the death in a respectful manner. Social and demographic factors can be understood as social cultural forces that influence the way people learn about death and childhood beyond. This is a reference you can visit and for a further research. Thank you for your time in this presentation.